welcome to the 8th of the Stalin's Russia video lessons. Today we are looking at the first of the major factors which help explain why Stalin comes to power. Now, the first thing I really want to reiterate is, much like the Hitler consolidation of power essay, there's a tendency of students to focus on almost trying to tell a story, on just basically listing what was on lesson 6. Paragraph 1 being the first section, paragraph 2, and so on. Do not do that. What we are trying to show is there are reasons why Stalin won. The lesson 6 stuff, i.e. the story of what happened, will be evidence to prove which of these reasons is more likely. So today we're looking at Stalin's positions. You'll notice it is a plural rather than a singular. This is because it is a standard answer given by many students, and they conflate, that means combine without understanding the nuance, many of Stalin's roles. So the first thing we are going to do is point out that although his position of General Secretary was important, we would contend perhaps actually other positions, which majority of students will not mention, are actually more important, and to be fair, they are more important. And many people assume that, for example, Stalin's ability to punish and investigate people comes from General Secretary when it's from a different role. And making those distinctions in the essay is easy mileage for you to talk about relative importance and so on in your analysis. As well as this, there is sometimes confusion once you've got so many different roles, because Stalin's skill is to gather roles, which one gives more advantages. Okay, so the General Secretary will give a type of advantage. Commissar of Nationalities will give another type of advantage. One of these will be more helpful in the longer term, General Secretary. One of these will be very helpful in the shorter term, Nationalities, for example. As well as this, there is often a lack of explanation of why does him being a General Secretary lead to him securing power. And I would say, although we'll cover this in the actual lessons, the most important thing you need to think about is how these roles interact with the other factors, particularly Stalin's weakness. The opposition's weakness and the political skill of Stalin himself, but also more importantly, how the leadership struggle is fought. If you remember, it is about votes in party congress and central committee. The strength of many of these roles is they give him advantage somehow or some ways in that situation. And hopefully you've already seen that when we talked about, like, for example, Lenin's funeral, the party lists, and various other things. And then the biggest thing people find difficult is all these roles, all these factors link to one another. And that's something for you to work out analytically. The positions are only useful because he's given them by his opposition, who are weak. He only makes use of them effectively because of his political skill, and you can say the same for each of those. So that's something to think about. So without further ado, let's talk about his first role, and the one that everyone's going to say. And it's not bad to say it, but if it's the only one you mention in the essay, then we're starting to limit ourselves artificially. This is the role of General Secretary. General Secretary is basically head of the Secretariat. Secretariats are the officially non-political, non-voting background staff around the party. So, for example, General Secretary will be at the Politburo writing notes of what's being said, or the agenda, so what's going to be said of the Central Committee will be agreed and sorted in advance by the General Secretary through the Secretariat. And this role was given to him by Zinoviev. Well, maybe not given to him. It was engineered for him by Zinoviev. So Zinoviev, who sees an ally in Stalin, someone he can manipulate, encourages Lenin and encourages the rest of the Bolshevik Party that as the Stalinist state, communist state, gets bigger and bigger and bigger, gets more and more bloated and complex in response to the civil war, and also just in response to trying to govern a country the size of Russia, they need someone to organize it in one core place. This is a logical solution if you are going to have such a vast bureaucratic state that the communists end up having. So Zinoviev is doing this not out of love, not out of efficiency, but out of politics. But actually, it's probably a role that is needed. It's not a pointless role. And this means that he gets a seat at the Politburo. Not necessarily respected at the Politburo because he's the admin boy, but still a seat in the Politburo, which, yes, means he is in conversations with people and he is rubbing shoulders with the leading Bolsheviks and therefore more likely to be able to make alliances because he's rubbing shoulders with them. But actually, the more important thing is it gives Stalin a degree of prestige. Stalin is known by pretty much everyone by this point, when he was actually a little bit of a background figure, and is seen as an ongoing important guy. In a situation where you run by patronage, people will only buy into you if they think that they'll get something back in return. If you are not seen as being politically strong, that will make you suffer in your competitiveness and how attractive you are to potential clients. So the Politburo seat is very, very important, both to give legitimacy and also help him start building up those alliances and that power base, which is the cornerstone of why he succeeds. So you could make the argument that General Secretary actually is more important for its just political position it puts Stalin in, as opposed to any of the tasks he gets from it. So the role itself gives the right to coordinate and manage lots and lots of different bodies, bureaus, organizations, and subset organizations within the Communist Party. The Communist Party is a mess, a tangle, lots and lots of different organizations, many of whom are just almost invented on the fly. Think almost like sort of everything Nazi, but even worse. Now, actually, they'll be consolidated into what very shortly. But that idea of sort of slightly chaotic, lots of different bureaucratic bodies is fairly similar. So what you do is you get the bureau, you get the Communist parties all in one place, and because they are, and that's important because previously, because you've got all these different groups all overlapping, with no clear leadership, they're being very inefficient. They are doing contradictory stuff. Often they're not doing stuff. And therefore, the General Secretary's job is to get all these different organizations and coordinate them. So, General Secretary in and of itself actually doesn't confer lots of direct power. All the stuff we're going to look at confers direct power. But it allows him to at least manage a broader array and be on face-to-face contacts and be friends with a broader array of Russians and be around a broader array of communist Russians. And that's going to be important for his reputation and him trying to use his political skill and him generating support. So what does he do? He manages the membership of the Communist Party. This means he can know the details, the disciplinary records, the backgrounds, and so on, and the reports on the checker, which he will use against individuals, threatening to release information, threatening to investigate for certain stuff, or even pretending that he didn't push certain stuff in order to buy loyalty, or at least buy favours. And we'll talk about the difference between loyalty and favours in the next essay. As well as that, he was the one who was organised the Politburo memos, so the memos between individuals, and to a lesser extent to the Central Committee, the minutes and the agendas. Minutes are the records of who said what. The agendas are what we are going to talk about. While you cannot lie on these things because people catch you out, you can adjust in a subtle way over time, and as you get more powerful, adjust more glaringly the narrative of what was said and what is going to be spoken about in order to suit you. So an example is in 1925, Stalin makes sure the items that Trotsky wants are not on the agenda of the Politburo, and therefore every time Trotsky tries to say something, it's not on the agenda, Trotsky, shut up. And then therefore he is unable to, or less able to, launch into his sort of debate-style diatribe to persuade people. As well as that, he makes sure when the Politburo agrees something, it happens. Now, this is probably the position of most power, because this essentially means that you will have to get around a large chunk of the Russian state and also party to make sure things are happening. For example, if the Politburo says we need to end NEP, you need to make sure that those orders get written down, they get organised. You can adapt that and change it as you see fit. And you make sure it happens by talking to the various bodies responsible. Same thing for changes about the army. By enacting the tasks of the Politburo, you are able to, although you can't deviate too much, you are able to, and have the power to, mediate a lot of what's going on, or at least be in the know. And that's very helpful for these debates because you can see who is doing what. And therefore you can position yourself very quickly to the most appropriate position. As well as this, whenever there's an argument between different officers, think Nazi Germany. Unlike Nazi Germany, there was someone whose job it was to actually work out who'd win, apart from Hitler, obviously. And therefore he would appoint individuals as part of his role and give people jobs in these various bodies. But also when there was a argument between them, he would reconcile and decide who's right. This is golden for patronage, golden to make favours. You give them someone a job, they owe you a favour. You pick someone for a job who you know is loyal, maybe not ideological. You pick someone for a job who's not known as a Bukharin supporter, for example. And In addition, you can make sure that your side and your supporters will always win a bureaucratic fight. So one organisation wants to take over control of something, another organisation also wants to do that. You pick the one who is more loyal to you. That means you've got a friend and now in a higher place. Okay, so the ability to appoint individuals, not every individual, but usually the bosses and the sort of one or two below that, and to reconcile fights between them is a very useful way for Stalin to get known and people to owe him a favour. And he will call in those favours when it comes to votes. As well as that, various key offices reported to Stalin, or Stalin was in charge of having oversight. So oversight is when you just keep an eye on, as opposed to tell them what to do. A classic example of this is the OGPU. Now, the Cheka will rename itself several times. The Cheka will rename itself first to the OGPU. Cheka, OGPU. It's also going to rename itself again to the NKVD, and then rename itself again to the KGB. That is a separate thing. All you need to know is whenever we say this, it is the terror state. Now, Stalin having oversight of the OGPU means he has access to the files of the OGPU, the membership of the OGPU. He knows the leaders of the OGPU, and they know him, and if they want an easy life, they do what he says to a greater or lesser degree. So therefore, these offices and this oversight ensures that he has control over significant elements of the state, which will be very useful, as we have already seen, in making sure when enemies are defeated, they are properly defeated. So how does this all help? Well, in reality, there's lots of little bits here. You've got, number one, the Politburo and its role in legitimizing and making Stalin a more public figure. And then you've got the fact that he is able to be almost in the bowels of the party. What that means is he is right at the center, knowing all the guys, knowing all the middle people, or the middling types, who actually, Zinoviev, Kamenev, etc., don't have the time or effort to really bother to get to know. Because he knows these guys are not in the Politburo, and often not even in the Central Committee, but they are in the party congress. Okay, that's sort of cadre. And therefore, he is actually particularly helpful in order for him to start engendering his own power base. Because if you remember, he doesn't actually have a geographical region outside nationalities, which we'll talk about. Balance this on its own, probably not enough. Okay, this is this role had been similar had been run previously with zero power. You might say that it requires someone to take advantage of this. You might suggest that it is the lack of oversight and the lapses of the opposition who don't see him abusing this. But you can also say, actually, many of the other factors are more important to actually give leverage. A lot of this is quite soft leverage, quite soft power bases, where the other ones gives you more power. So obviously this links and is balanced and is therefore not perfect. So we need to look at other factors and usually other offices he holds, which helps him get into power. So I would say the next one we should talk about is his role as the head of the Rabkrin. That is the Workers' and Peasants' Inspectorate. Essentially, they looked at the Tsarist bureaucracy and saw inefficiency, corruption, incompetence, and a lack of meritocracy. People got the jobs because of who they were. If they weren't very good or they were corrupt, nothing happened to them. So therefore, it was decided to avoid such a situation. We need a body, an Ofsted of the civil service, if you will, to investigate, discipline, and remove individuals from the party through something called the Central Bureau of Complaints. Stalin is in charge of this from 1920. You can hopefully see how this will be very effective to gain favours from people. You get a report, they are stone cold guilty, you have a conversation, they'll vote with you next time in Party Congress, they're not found guilty. Or they're an enemy, they're intractable, oh look, we found some evidence, let's remove them from the party. And that ability to both investigate, discipline and remove can be used to both positively to reward, i.e. save someone's career, or destroy someone's career. And that's going to be very helpful for Stalin to, over time particularly, navigate and build a power base of people who owe him favours and will vote with him because he helped them out one time. More than that, though, his power to recommend promotions in the party bureaucracy, and this is a greater range of promotions than the General Secretary give, which are only the officers he directly controls. This is much more about, this is a good guy, he's a good guy, he should get promoted. Now obviously you can see how that's going to be used to buy off many middling, arrogant and self-serving middle-level bureaucrats who just want power. That is Stalin's type. That is Stalin's exact type of guy he wants. No, it's people who are not ideological, people who will vote as they're told, and will take the reward when they're told. The Rabkrin gives him this ability to recommend people for promotions, particularly in the regions. And that's important because the regions have whole bunches of people who are who will come to party congress. So the Mongolian party boss, if appointed by Stalin, will not only turn up to the party congress, he will bring about 8 to 20 voters who are also from the local parties in Outer Mongolia. And so that's going to be very important to build up blocks, because one by one, particularly for the more senior positions, it is very, very helpful for him to gain power. Although he leaves this role in 1922 in order to become a general secretary, he brings a staunch ally, and I am not going to try and pronounce that name. For those of you in lessons, you will hear me massacre this, and no one needs that on public record. So, that man, Mr. O, he leaves him in charge of it. He is a slavishly loyal follower until he gets shot in the head later. But that's a separate problem. For now, he is a slavishly loyal follower. And additionally, Zalob continues on the complaints side. So essentially, the head of the Central Bureau of Complaints, Zalob, who will probably be the only survivor of this period, and Mr. O, who is in charge of more the actual role of the Workers and Peasants Inspectorate, they will continue the project of building up Stalin's power base. Because they are loyal, they will do the exact same thing, but they will say by proxy, you need to go and vote for Stalin. And so by leaving his middlemen in charge, he is able to take the general secretary and gain that, but also continue the benefits from this. Okay, and eventually he will merge this office with his own office, called the Party Control Committee, and basically mean that the only mechanism within the entire party will become to investigate, punish, and appeal against things will become under Stalin. So if the only way you can get investigated and fired is through Stalin, he's a good friend to have. And if you are planning to be corrupt, which a solid 80% of the party bureaucracy, particularly in the regions, is going to be. So hopefully you can see how this is vital to build up that base of favours, base of support, particularly over time as people get replaced or people get put under suspicion for being Trotskyites and they swear they're not, and if they say the magic words, which are Comrade Stalin is very good, or along those lines, probably in Russian, then they will do very well. The balance of this is obviously, although this is important and this is helpful, this is a slow burn. This only happens over time. You only put new people in position when old people leave. And there's only a certain number of investigations you're going to have per year. So this is very helpful to build up over time, but it's not necessarily the only reason. There are other factors which build into that. And hopefully you can see, for the similar reasons we looked at before, this links naturally to Stalin's political skill to be able to control people, control offices and make the most of them, but also the weakness of opposition to not look at this and go, this is probably a poor decision to put in the hands of one man. His next role, always forgotten, and a nice brief one, is he was Commissar of Nationalities from 1917 to 1923, when the Commissar system was dissolved. This made he was in charge of huge amounts of areas where the national minorities existed. Now, if you remember, the vast majority of people not vast majority, 56% of people in Russia were minorities. So actually, to be Commissar for Nationalities means you are technically in charge of 56% of the people. That's not quite the case, because in the western provinces, the Ukrainians, the Polish, the Finnish, the Belarusians, Latvians, Estonians, etc., they are still under control of different groups. So he mostly deals with the Caucasus and the East. So actually it's only about 22% of the population. That's still quite a large bit of the population who you are directly in charge of. You appoint the party bosses. You appoint and know the people under that. And this base role, even though it ends in 1923 before the power struggle, those people still know Stalin and still like Stalin after that point, and they still remain in those offices. So it means that Stalin, this gives Stalin his starting point base of support, the thing why they ally with him and take him seriously at the start, because in reality he can bring the votes of Mongolia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, for example, deepest, darkest Siberia, okay, to the he can bring out to the table and makes him worthwhile. This is where his starting point would be. Now, this doesn't get any bigger. And if anything, it drifts a little as old people leave those regions and get replaced by Stalin using his workers and peasants inspectorate and general secretary positions, but that's a different role. But it will give him his starting point, and that will be almost his bedding point to build from. So this is therefore vital to make him considered in the first place and to be taken seriously in the first place, and for stuff like Zinoviev to engineer a role for him, because Zinoviev isn't doing it for love, he's doing it for that 22%, and that's power base and that support. It makes him part of the game. And it gives him a token to enter the game. And because he can enter the game, without that, he's not becoming leader. So I'd say this is a fundamental prerequisite, which becomes decreasingly important over time as the other officers give him more power. Obviously, therefore, that includes the balance to this and the links. The last two, and I think in reality, those first three, you can do an entire essay just on that. In the finest tradition of video lessons, I'm going to dump all the information on you, and you can work it out for yourselves. So the next one is the Orgburo. The Orgburo is something that Stalin was elected to in 1919 and stays for his entire time of the power struggle. This is a collective office, so there's not one, because it's quite a lot of power and because a lot of positions. It is run with lots of a committee rather than individual. But in 1923, there are only real two competitors, Tomsky and Rykov, who are supporters under Rabkrin, who are part of the organisation, who are actually worth a damn and will have their own political power and will stand up to Stalin. But hopefully you recognise those names, because Stalin is quite close friends with, is an ally of Bukharin until 1928, and so Tomsky and Rykov are not a problem between 1923 and 28 because they're on the same team. And more than that, Stalin is the liaison officer between the Politburo and the Orgburo. So something is described in the Politburo, and he is the guy who then tells the Orgburo. Why is he in that role? Because he happens to be in the Politburo for other reasons. Zinoviev, 1922, General Secretary, etc. Okay, because of the Politburo, his role there, although he is technically equal as everyone else on the committee, he's the one with his ear to the door. He knows what's being said in the Politburo, and that allows him to adapt, change, alter, and etc. The message of the Politburo, and therefore affect recommendations, either leave bits out or add bits in. And that's a huge amount of power, because in reality, the Orgburo, number one, delegates a lot of its tasks to the General Secretary, but even when it does do those tasks, it's actually quite a powerful position. The Orgburo's role is to make sure that the lower level, the grassroots parties, if you think about, and people get confused, how is this different General Secretary? General Secretary is Central Party in Moscow, the people who run the national profile, whereas Orgburo is very much trying to keep an eye on those Siberian parties, Outer Mongolian parties, Vladivostok parties, and so on. Their job is to keep an eye on them, make sure they are doing what they are appointing their chairman properly, they are doing their jobs properly, and there's not that much corruption. So they nominate positions, and guys, drum roll, write the party list, the approved delegate list, if you remember talking about that in 1924, which Stalin will use to increasingly only make sure that delegates he approves of are on that list. That nominates the positions and suggests people who are eligible to be voted in as party chairman, something which means you can control to some extent the type of people who become party chairman. And if you are Stalin, then you say, well, if you want to be a party chairman, you've got to show loyalty. You've got to show loyalty to me. If you do that, then you'll be on the list, and we'll see if you can get voted. If, however, you're dirty Trotskyites or Bukharinite, then you're going to find yourself off the list as soon as they are out of favour. So while he is not picking the individual chairman, that would be an impossible task for all of this, his office, and this office controlled and influenced heavily by him, because the Orgburo decides, but then it goes to the Office of General Secretary to happen, and there's going to be some accidents of things added or taken away from lists. The Huguenots chairman are to some extent influenced, and as Stalin gets more politically powerful, increasingly influenced by that of the Orgburo and therefore Stalin. In addition, they do the oversight of work, and they make sure the lower parties are working as they should. Now, the power behind this is simple. A large chunk of the party congress are nominees from the party bosses of the local parties. So all the party bosses get together and they will have a vote to recommend that one of them will go to the party congress to represent their district. If everyone who votes or the majority of votes owe their job or position or know that they shouldn't anger Stalin, when they turn up to the party congress, they are already baked in the bags, more likely to be sympathetic to Stalin's position. They're more likely to, when he approaches them or one of his supporters approaches them, buy into his side. So because it gives influence and control of the lower parties, it in turn means that the delegates they choose to the party congress end up being slightly more controlled, slightly more loyal. And again, it's that party power base, particularly. If you remember, Stalin was always more powerful in the party congress than he was in the Central Committee. But if you're powerful in the party congress, you pick who's in the Central Committee every few years, and they pick who's in the Politburo. So that does bleed up. But his power is very much down in the party congress, bleeding up year on year on year. So this clearly helps make sure that he has control of local parties, although obviously a lot of this is shared with other people and he still has to compromise. So it's not necessarily that he puts complete loyal people in, it is as much as he makes sure people who are disloyal aren't allowed in. So Trotsky supporters are not allowed in. And that helps him, but not necessarily as much as some of the other parties. So it's more of useful as something to deny than accept. By the time Bukharin is the only one left, then he uses it nakedly for his own power, because he is now strong. But in the early years, he can't necessarily afford to do that. His final position he has, and we've already mentioned this, is the Politburo. Officially, he was a member in 1917, but this was one not based on being at any particular government office, just being there. And when they seize power, he becomes a member as well. And because he stays as a member, sorry. And because he happens to be in the Politburo, they feel like they need to give him a job. Because he is a Georgian and the only Georgian, they give him Commissariat of Nationalities, as we mentioned before. This is a minor role which they don't care about, and this is therefore a happy role for the Georgian who's a bit of a dunce. But the Politburo, apologies for that, is a key organisation which basically decides and is the brain of the party. Now, when Lenin is alive, that doesn't really matter because Lenin decides and everyone nods. When Lenin is dead, it gives you a way to affect policy. And although it was voted in and dependent on the Central Committee for it to put it up, it does provide power. As mentioned, the power of the Politburo comes from two locations. The legitimacy and the profile created by the fact that you are at the very top. And therefore, when you make suggestions that you should be leader, and when you turn up to some random guy from Siberia, they are overawed and will do what you say because you are an important guy, that will help you build a party base. In addition, because he is in the Politburo, he is alongside Kamenev, Zinoviev, Bukharin, even though he is seen as a second-rate figure. This means he is more likely and able to build relationships, build alliances, which are, if you remember, is the cornerstone of how he comes to power. His ability to navigate lots and lots and lots of alliances over time. So through this, it enables him to basically do the currency of the and enables him to almost be considered and allowed to play the game of the currency of the power struggle, which is building power bases and to build alliances. This on its own, though, is not enough. Just because you have the ability to make alliances and the ability to impress people doesn't mean that you'll have a strong power base or you'll make those alliances effectively. And so it's Stalin's skill to actually then use this position and use this leverage to make friendships, etc. But also his other offices, which help solidify his control over bigger and bigger chunks of the party. So the overall question is essentially, in the power struggle, because the Communist Party is weirdly and bureaucratically controlled from votes from Party Congress and Central Committee. This is something which lies on patronage and alliances. These roles give him the currency, particularly to build power bases of support, who will vote for him. That makes him attractive to alliances. If you don't have a power base of support, why do I need you as a friend? Look at Zinoviev, for example. But in addition, ensures that he is able to win votes on his own and increasingly win votes without the assistance of others. This is the cornerstone of how he's able to therefore make one by one each of the individuals' factions, remove them one by one from office. So we're going to move on to the next factor in due course in the next video lesson. But until then, see you in the next video.